at the shoulder joint. So if you look over here, you can see another muscle. And this muscle right here is called the teres minor. And the teres minor also does the same function. It helps to be able to laterally rotate or externally rotate at the shoulder. Okay. Then if you look over here, you can see this muscle right there. This is the teres major, and the teres major has three functions. One function is to extend the whole arm at the shoulder joint. The other one is to be able to do adduction at the shoulder joint, and then to medially rotate the shoulder. So that's his function. All right, so if we look here, we see this huge muscle right here, all this muscle right here. This is called the latissimus dorsi. And latissimus dorsi has three big functions, and those functions are the exact same as the teres major. So if you know what the teres major does, you know what the latissimus dorsi does, which is extend at the shoulder joint. It also adducts at the shoulder joint, and it does medial rotation. So if you think about it, we go back to those terms again. These two muscles are synergists to one another for all of those actions. But then if you think about it, the infraspinatus and the teres minor, they like to externally rotate or laterally rotate. So these two muscles would be antagonist to the teres major and latissimus dorsi, because these guys medially rotate. These two guys over here, teres minor and infraspinatus, they laterally rotate. All right, guys, so these guys, I know I mentioned them already, the infraspinatus and the teres minor. There is two other muscles that we'll talk about when we get to the arm, that being the supraspinatus and the subscapularis. These muscles are really deep muscles, and they make up the rotator cuff. And you can remember that by SITS: supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. Okay, so that's our rotator cuff muscles. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transition to the left side of the torso so we can see some more back muscles. All right, so here we have the rhomboids. So two parts of it. So here's the rhomboids minor, and then this one's the rhomboids major. Both of these muscles have the same function. They retract the scapula, so they help to pull the scapula back, right? So again, rhomboids minor here, rhomboids major here, and they retract the scapula. Then over here we have some muscles called the erector spinae, and there are three groups of them. So you have right here, running right down the midline, you have what's called the spinalis. Okay, so you have the spinalis right there. Next to that, you have the longissimus. So then you have the longissimus. You got spinalis, then longissimus, then all the way out here on the outside, you have the iliocostalis. So again, let's do it one more time. Spinalis, longissimus, iliocostalis, right? All of these muscles function to be able to extend the vertebral column. So extend the neck and to be able to extend the vertebral column. So if you remember the abdominal muscles, all of them except for the transversus abdominis flex the vertebral column. So if you think about it, this guy extends the vertebral column. So the erector spinae muscles as a group are antagonists to the abdominal wall muscles, being the rectus abdominis, the internal oblique, and the external oblique for that action. Okay? And if you think about it, he also extends the neck. So who else extends the neck? The trapezius. So those guys are synergists. All right, so if we cover over here, there's this muscle right here kind of wrapping around here. That's called the serratus posterior inferior. That's the serratus posterior inferior. So if you look here, we got the thoracolumbar fascia, which is an aponeurosis. So it's a connective tissue aponeurosis. And it's a good origin for the latissimus dorsi. So if you look here, guys, we can see another set of muscle that I want to talk about, which is right here. This is called the quadratus lumborum. And the quadratus lumborum, based upon its position, it helps to be able to kind of extend the lower back. So it kind of extends the lower back, and it actually fixes the ribs from below. So it fixates the ribs and extends the lower back. So that's our quadratus lumborum right there. All right, guys, so that basically gives us all the muscles for the back that we're going to see on this model. All right, so just taking another look at these muscles from a different muscle model, just a different view. Now if we look here, again, we got the trapezius muscle, and it comes all the way down here. Remember, it has a descending, has a transverse, and then it has an ascending portion. So big muscle, right? And again, it extends the neck, elevates the scapula, and retracts the scapula. Okay, that's the function of the trapezius. Pretty big muscle. Then if you look over here, we have the infraspinatus right there. Infraspinatus does lateral rotation or external rotation at the shoulder. We have this tiny little muscle right there, and that is the teres minor. And the teres minor also does lateral rotation at the shoulder, so these two are synergists to one another for that action. Then if you look right here, we have the teres major, and the teres major does medial rotation at the shoulder, so then that means that it's an antagonist to these two muscles. It does extension at the shoulder, so it could be an antagonist to the pectoralis major or the coracobrachialis, and it also does adduction. Then if we look down here, this big muscle right here, this one right here, this is called the latissimus dorsi. So latissimus dorsi, it basically helps to be able to do the same functions as the teres major. So again, if you remember what the teres major does, extension of the shoulder, adduction of the shoulder, and medial rotation, the latissimus dorsi does all those same functions. So these two are synergists to each other for those actions. If you look here, we have all of this connective tissue aponeurosis that we already talked about, which again is going to be the thoracolumbar fascia. It's the origin for the one of the origins for the latissimus dorsi. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take a look over here on the left side. So if we look over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this deltoid muscle off so that we can see some of these deeper layers here. So let's take a look at these guys. If you look here, number 2 that we have over here, this is called the supraspinatus, and it sits inside the supraspinous fossa. And what it does is it helps to be able to do what's called abduction, or pulling the humerus, the whole arm, away from that shoulder joint. So he does abduction at the shoulder. So if you think about it, we just said that the teres major does adduction. So then these two, the teres major and the supraspinatus, are going to be antagonists to one another for that action. Then if we look over here, number 3, this big chunk of muscle right here, this is the infraspinatus, and we already said what the infraspinatus does. It does lateral rotation at the shoulder joint, or external rotation. And then we have another muscle, which is going to be this guy right here, and this is called the teres minor. And the teres minor also does lateral rotation or external rotation at the shoulder joint. All right, so these two again are synergists to one another. And then we have the teres major right here, and the teres major, he does again what we said: extension at the shoulder joint, adduction at the shoulder joint, and medial rotation at the shoulder joint. And again, I might have mentioned this already, but again, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and the subscapularis, which we'll see it's anterior, it's in the subscapular fossa. Those are going to be making up the rotator cuff, which are basically fixators, okay? Then if you look here, we're going to have these muscles right here, these two guys here. These are rhomboids. Again, rhomboids minor, rhomboids major, and these retract the scapula. Okay, so they're synergists to the trapezius muscle, who also retracts the scapula. Okay, but they would be antagonists to the serratus anterior and the pectoralis minor, who designed to protract that scapula. Okay. Then if we look here, we got our erector spinae muscles. Okay, these chunks here, again, from the most medial to the most lateral, we go spinalis, longissimus, iliocostalis. And again, they extend the neck, so they're synergists to, you could say, the splenius capitis and the trapezius for extension of the neck, but they're going to be antagonists, as we already said, to the abdominal wall muscles, because they extend the vertebral column, whereas the abdominal wall muscles, except for the transversus abdominis, they flex the vertebral column. Okay? And then again, we have the serratus posterior inferior muscle here. And I'm going to turn it a little bit here. And we can see that tiny little muscle group over here called the quadratus lumborum. And again, we know that that helps to extend the lower back and fix these ribs from below. Again, it gives us all the muscles that we need to see here on the back muscle wall.